Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you grabbed a quick snack. Maybe you found a new comfy seat and you are ready for our afternoon session. I can't tell you how excited and how thankful I am to be able to introduce our next speakers. DEI progress is a priority within the AIM&P Networks Association Council, as well as a priority for SIIA. This afternoon, we are joined by SIIA President Jeff Joseph and a very special guest, Jeff's father, U.S. Ambassador James Joseph. Together, they will share stories and insights surrounding promoting social justice, equity and inclusion, and corporate social responsibility. I will let Jeff do the honors of introducing his father to you all. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Jen, how are you? Thank you so much for that
Welcome.
introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this special session. As Jen noted, diversity, equity, and inclusion are not just words for SIA and for our AIM&P Network Associations Council. They're values we seek to implement each and every day. They're guideposts to help us navigate our decision-making process, and they're goals we seek to exceed. Now, I'd like to say that the current conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and racial justice, and our nation's past with race, this is a unique moment in time, driven in part by the tragic murders of Black men and women by those who should be protecting us. But the sad truth is that there's nothing particularly unique about this moment. We've been here before, and frankly, too many times. So today, we are so blessed to have the opportunity to learn from the past so that ideally we do not repeat our mistakes. And while the struggle continues, perhaps we can find some hope for the future through the successes of those who preceded us. Now, I first met Jim Joseph roughly 57 years, 29 days, 19 hours, and some odd minutes ago. And I'd like to say it was a momentous event, but frankly, I don't recall much about it at all. But what I do know is this: my father is a true American success story. He's a true American hero who has devoted his career and literally risked his life to lead the fight for social justice and equality for all. He was born and raised in rural Louisiana in a small town that served as the state headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. Through hard work, a commitment to education, and a fierce passion for justice and equality, he went on to the heights of success in public service, the private sector, civil society, and education. He served in senior executive or advisory positions for 4 U.S. presidents, both Democrats and Republicans. And as Jen noted, he served as the U.S. ambassador to South Africa for President Clinton as the nation was transitioning from the apartheid system. He is the only U.S. ambassador to present his credentials to President Nelson Mandela. He's also been a trade association president. He's a pioneer in corporate social responsibility, having served as vice president with Cummins Engine Company, the world's largest producer of heavy-duty diesel engines. And he's also served as a university professor and a chaplain, where he led the civil rights and anti-Vietnam War movements. You can see why I used to joke that my dad has had a hard time holding a job. But his awards include 19 honorary degrees, election to the Louisiana Political Hall of Fame, and the Order of Good Hope from the government of the Republic of South Africa. In 1979, Ebony magazine named him to its list of 100 most influential Black Americans. He's also the author of 3 books, including his most recent, the semi-autobiographical Saved for a Purpose, which you can find on Amazon. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my father, Ambassador James Joseph. Hey, Dad, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, Jeff. Congratulations. I understand the conference has been very successful.
Well, thank you. We're so pleased to have you. He is in lovely Sarasota, staring out at the Sarasota Bay. I'm glad you could join us today.
Yeah. Well, I'm inside at the moment, but I can see the bay.
Well, let's jump right in. I think I was about 15 or 16. I was a teenager when my mother woke me one morning before dawn to share news that relates to the title of your most recent book, Saved for a Purpose. Can you describe the story behind the title, and maybe more importantly, how it's come to shape your worldview and your sense of purpose?
Well, it was 1968, and I was Deputy Secretary of the Department of Interior for President Carter. And one of my responsibilities was oversight of the American territories. So I decided to take some time and go out to the South Pacific and visit as many territories as I could. This was, did I say 1978?
78, correct, right.
And as I was moving around from one island to another, and I visited about 12 to 13 islands, my plane suddenly lost one engine and lost then a second engine, and we crashed into the Pacific Ocean. I was on a life raft for about 4 hours. When I was rescued and I was back on shore, and the press was around, they interviewed me, and among the things I said was, I thought I had been saved for a purpose. So when I decided to write about what it means to apply ethics in all three sectors of American society, I thought the title, Saved for a Purpose, would be a good title, because in the reflection, my life had always been purposeful, but I was still pursuing where I would try to make my best participation. And I came, I guess, what you would call an ethical participant rather than just an observer. So I started to teach and write about ethics. And that's how it got to be Saved for a Purpose.
And I should note that that you don't know how to swim. You never learned how to swim. We talk a lot about the discrimination, and we'll talk a bit about what it was like to grow up in Jim Crow, Louisiana. But one piece was that you didn't have access to a pool, so you never learned how to swim because they were for whites only. So you're in the middle of the Pacific without any ability to swim.
That is true. When I got to the door, as the plane was sort of sitting on the water, and I looked out, I could see a member of the crew inflating a life raft. And I looked at that life raft, and I thought, well, I used to be able to float in my friend's swimming pool. I think this is about the same distance. I ought to be able to make it. So I jumped in the water, but my life jacket worked, so I didn't test whether I could really make it by floating.
The obvious is that thank God you did, and I think you short yourself a bit. You say that was a sort of an ethical moment, but the fact is that as we'll walk through, you've been guided by this sense of a good moral, strong moral compass and ethical compass. For many of us who are watching this, Jim Crow is the stuff of history books, or maybe we've seen it on TV shows, but this was your life. You grew up in this era, in one of the most challenging areas of the country. Can you talk a bit about your experience and your memories growing up in the segregated South, and not just about the systemic racism, but also the strength of the community?
I was born in a little town in southwest Louisiana called Plaisance. I grew up in Opelousas, which was the real town. Plaisance was really the rural. And I went to segregated schools. I studied from hand-me-down books that were no longer used by the white students. I studied in a building that had been discarded as unfit for study by white students. And I could not get any jobs, so I ended up picking cotton in the summer, standing on the corner waiting for the truck to come by to take people out to pick cotton. It was in the state headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan, so I had all of the experience of seeing people lynched and all that sort of thing. Those were the times in which I grew up.
Yeah, and I don't want to make this too maudlin, but if you recall, I recall a story of you were walking home with your brother, my uncle, and with a friend, and there was an incident, and the next day the friend disappeared. Do you recall that story?
Yeah. One of my brother's classmates went home one day, and he was evidently surrounded by white students who were out having fun. And they used to have fun by picking on Black students who walked home. They, of course, took buses home. But anyway, I don't know what the altercation was, but he was found in the bayou the next day.
It's so horrific. This is the era in which you raised, and yet you have the strength of community. But your father, my grandfather, was a pastor, and there's this great spirit of faith. How was the community sort of able to live through this, the everyday indignities of Jim Crow, and the horrors, and still sort of maintain that commitment to faith?
Well, I'm not sure what the sources of the resilience was, but when someone was sick, we cared for them. When someone was hungry, we fed them. We didn't think of it as charity or philanthropy. We simply thought of an obligation that we had to humanity. And that in itself created a kind of network of community in which we supported each other.
And perhaps the beginning of your desire and your career in bringing together community and supporting and investing in community. So I was born in New Haven while you were at Yale Divinity School, and you moved us from New Haven to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which was also an epicenter of racism and legalized discrimination, to teach at Stillman College. As one of our friends said, it was like going from theory at Divinity School to the reality of application. I recall the stories of threats to your life and mine, literally anonymous phone calls threatening your life and mine. Can you talk about that time a bit and what you're feeling and thinking as you made the move to the front lines of the civil rights movement and being in such hostile territory?
Yeah, I had this affinity for ending up in the epicenters of the Ku Klux Klan. I was born in a local epicenter and ended up in the national. Tuscaloosa was the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. And when I arrived, we had the movement in Birmingham. We had activities in Montgomery, but nothing had happened in Tuscaloosa. So being brave and bright, I decided that something needed to be done. So I went around and met with leaders and particularly the ministers in the community to find out what their plans were, to discover that they had none. And so I finally found three ministers who were willing to join with me in sending a letter to the probate judge to demand that they not use colored and white signs in the new building that they were constructing. As a result of that, we got involved in all sorts of activities that we had not intended and ended up with was the Tuscaloosa Citizens Action Movement, which ended up integrating the hotels and the restaurants, etc. But we started out just trying to figure out what can individuals do. And as a result, the three of us were co-chair of the Tuscaloosa Citizen Action Committee, which integrated that city.
And Legacy lives on. And this was you began to interact with other civil rights leaders. Dr. King came to town, and you participated in a joint rally.
Then I first met Dr. Martin Luther King, who came to speak at one of our mass meetings. I saw him a number of times after that, but that was where I first met him. And I also got to know John Lewis, Andy Young, and a number of his staff who I became friends with and interact with all the way to the present. Andy Young and I are still close friends.
Yeah. Literally the words of history books, but literally your life. Now I recall, and this may be anecdotal, so you can correct me, but my mother, who grew up in New Jersey and hadn't lived in the South, encouraged you to move us away at some point, and so we moved to Southern California, where you became chaplain at the Claremont colleges and led the civil rights and anti-war movement. So the first question is that an accurate portrayal of what caused the move?
Well, yeah, what happened is my wife wasn't very happy in Alabama, where I was getting threats by the Klan every night, and they usually were threatening to do something to her or to you. You were just a few months old. But she and a friend of mine, who was an official at the Claremont colleges in California, got together and worked out a deal where I got an invitation to go to Claremont. And Claremont is this gorgeous city with these great universities. And so I accepted, and I went from being a leader in the civil rights movement to being a leader in the anti-war movement. And I found when I got to Southern California and became active that I got the same threats that I had gotten in Alabama. This time it was not the Klan, but the Joan Birch Society and groups like that. But I threw myself into that. And from then on, regardless of what my profession was, I was also an activist.
Indeed, and in that position, well, I guess in both places, but particularly in Southern California, at Claremont, we often saw the frustrations, the passions of the students who had legitimate concerns about the war and civil rights, but they those understandable frustrations often turned violent and destructive, not dissimilar from what we witnessed over the past year. How did you counsel those? If you sort of worked in in a movement that was based on compassion and understanding and nonviolence, how did you counsel those students who felt whose frustrations just took over and turned to violence?
Well, first of all, I was an advocate for nonviolence, which I had learned from my work with Dr. King in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But the interesting thing about it is I was an advocate for nonviolence because it was the only tactic available to us. And we didn't have anything but the soft power that we used in the movement. And as a result, I started out trying to persuade them that nonviolence was an important strategy and tactic. And of course, I had individual counseling with the most militant, and those were the 60s when the students were very militant. So it was both the counseling of nonviolence, the individual counseling of those who are likely to be violent, and I participated in their activities. I can remember an occasion when I agreed to sit in on the ROTC building with them if they didn't engage in an activity that was they were planning that was much more violent. I talked them out of it, but as a condition of talking them out of it, I had to commit to participating with them in the demonstrations. So I got involved in those things as well.
Were there a lot of other university chaplains or school administrators who were participating in those protests at the time, who were joining with the students?
No.
I guess it was sort of a redundant question, but yeah, I figured.
The Claremont colleges, a group of colleges that work together in the Oxford University system, and Pitzer College was a progressive institution. And so whenever I announced the demonstration, I had a whole bunch of students from Pitzer and maybe one or two from Pomona or Harvey Mudd or one of the other colleges, but hardly ever many faculty. But much more faculty there than I did when I was doing demonstration in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Fair enough.
At Stillman College, where I was working, I could never get any of the faculty participating in the demonstrations.
But your passion and your understanding of how to reach and speak to these young people encourage you to do so. So yet again, our life took a different turn, and you moved our family from this beautiful university setting to small town Indiana, where you ran a corporate foundation and then ran the corporate social responsibility program for Cummins Engine, pursuing social justice through sort of a less predictable path and dealing with the C-suite during a time well before many companies even thought about corporate social responsibility or the responsibility at all to the communities in which they operate. How are you able to affect change in the corporate environment and demonstrate the value to the leadership and stakeholders?
Well, I went to Columbus, Indiana to head the foundation of the company, Cummins Engine Company, and the wealthy family who founded the company and whose head was the patriarch, was the chairman of the board. And after a while, a couple of years in that capacity, they challenged me to help them think through what it meant to be a responsible company. And so I left. I didn't exactly leave the foundation job because that reported to me that we formed an organization called Corporate Action, in which my role was to help them think about what it meant to be a responsible company. I was not only the monitor and the catalyst, but I was working for a CEO whose commitment was so strong that I knew that he always had my back, so I could take many risks. But what I did was to form an organization that could assess what it meant to be responsible. I went around and talked to all of the senior executives. I asked the head of marketing what it means to be responsible in marketing. I asked the head of manufacturing, resources, etc. And then I worked with human resources to put this together in their performance review system so that when they were evaluated on the basis of things they had suggested that it meant to be responsible. So one of the things I learned from J. Owen Miller, who was head of the company, that a company is what it rewards. It's interesting to think about that. It's not what it says so much in its public relations statement or its code of conduct. It's what it rewards its people for being. Mm-hmm. And so that if these were the values of the company, then they ought to be rewarded for the values. We find that in many places, the marketing, manufacturing heads make so much money, more money than human resource manager. But they still say that people are most important product, but at the same time, they don't demonstrate it. So Owen Miller used to say that a company is what it rewards its people for being.
He was a very special one. That's a lesson not only for corporations and associations, but really should be an approach that we should take on a national level. But that's a discussion for another time.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit. I have more questions, but to talk a little bit about J. Owen Miller, just because I know how much he meant to you, and what some of the work we're doing in our association is beginning to build mentoring and mentorship opportunities, and he had such a huge impact on your life. Can you just talk about him a little bit?
Well, he was my mentor, even though we didn't call it for that. He just mentored me. And he made it possible for me to travel things around the world. And he supported me in all sorts of high-risk activities. When I was in the anti-apartheid movement and got involved in supporting some things that were high risk for the company, and customers protested, I got the support of the CEO. He was a Midwestern person who'd been a Rhodes Scholar, who read his New Testament in Greek still, but he was also a very astute businessman who took this little company to become the largest manufacturer of diesel engines in the world. But he was a very special person.
I remember his being kind to me when I was young and at church after somebody who would speak to me and spend time with me and this sort of it. So he was special in so many ways, including of giving his time to young me. You referenced South Africa. Jumping ahead many years, we moved to Washington. We worked in the Carter administration, ran the Council on Foundation, a trade association, and then were named the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. And I love this story so much. So we used to have this picture, I think it still exists, of your first trip in the 70s to South Africa, where you're standing in front of a pool with the sign behind you that essentially says no dogs, no something, and no people of color allowed in the pool. And there we fast forward 20 some odd years, and here you are presenting your papers as the official U.S. representative to South Africa to President Mandela. You were there at an amazing time, post-apartheid, the transition, the observing and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, really the birth of a new nation. What did you learn from that time there and those experiences that may help inform the current movement here in the U.S. and specifically as we try to reconcile with our nation's complex past over racism and discrimination?
Well, I would add that in addition to the time you mentioned, I tried to get into South Africa and they denied me a visa during that time. So I was pleased to be in a position to issue visas later. But nevertheless, what I discovered during the time was what I really learned from J. Owen Miller. I overlapped with him for 3 years. And the first thing I learned was about the importance of forgiveness as a part of human relationships. And whereas people don't understand how we can forgive those who may have oppressed us, the experience of being Black in America or Black anywhere have created a capacity for resilience and endurance, in which you could accept the humanity of the adversary at the same time while you try to change his practices. Martin Luther King used to call it loving the enemy, and quoting from the Bible, which he didn't mean liking the enemy, but he meant respecting the humanity of the adversary. And so with Nelson Mandela, I learned the importance of forgiveness. The other thing I learned is that forgiveness is not something you simply direct toward the other person. It is also self-serving because it helps to eliminate the stress that comes from anger or hostility or resentment. And it's not forgetting, but in forgiving, it's deciding just to move on rather than being preoccupied with that which has wronged you or the person who has wronged you. And so I learned the importance of forgiveness as part of the reconciliation process. I also learned something special about reconciliation. By reconciliation, I mean changing the condition of relationships between people. And reconciliation comes in many dimensions. And in South Africa, we were exposed to at least 4 different kinds of reconciliation. The first was personal reconciliation, which has to do with the sort of personal existential rebalancing of the self. In other words, one has to transcend deceptions, misinformation, and the teachings that we have received and look beyond those. And so I learned in reconciliation what William Wildwood said, it is worse to be untaught than mistaught. or just the reverse. It's worse to be mistaught than untaught. And so I have to get rid of the deceptions and all of the other things that are in my way. Then there was the social, communal reconciliation. And South Africa was special because they had a concept of community called Ubuntu, which literally meant I am because you are. And to deny my dignity and deny your dignity is to deny my own. And so they have notions of relationship in which even when the tribes had wars between each other, they had war healers who brought people together after the conflict was over to try and affirm and reaffirm their common humanity. And the next aspect of reconciliation after social is, of course, political, where statecraft is practiced among people who are adversaries. They may not love each other, but they learn to work with each other. And then there was the fourth, which is economic reconciliation. And economic reconciliation, I mean, people talk about reparations. I don't like to use that word because it has negative connotation to a lot of people. I prefer to think of economic reconciliation, where you begin to pay the debt through the practices of the society in housing, in education, in health, etc. And there are many ways in which you might organize this in a society, but I prefer to think of it as economic reconciliation. So I learned about the importance of forgiveness, the importance and the dimensions of reconciliation. And that's a long enough answer to that question.
No, but it's that. You touched on so much there. We were discussing as we were preparing for this. I could spend hours just in this conversation. We're going to go to audience Q&A in a minute. I have one question. I also should note that that you're joined today by your wife, by my stepmother, Mary Braxton Joseph, who's there. So those of you, they're not ghosts in the background. There's someone there with them who has an illustrious career of her own as a journalist and beyond. Has been tremendous. But I want to just touch on one thing, then we'll go to audience Q&A, the Q&A that you mentioned, this concept of it's worse to be mistaught. You know, we're in the middle of this dialogue over so-called critical race theory, and we're seeing states move to ban not only again so-called critical race theory, but even discussions about a race and its place in U.S. history. They claim this approach is anti-white. How do you respond to such critiques?
Well, one of the things I've done is I have written a book, as we start off talking about my experience. And the purpose of that book was to help people understand the issues that are involved in the discussion of race and in the practices around race. So that's one of the things that I have done. What was the other part of your question?
This is sort of this pushback. I mean, it's a larger. I guess the question goes to larger than just critical race theory, but those who question, Black Lives Matter movement, those who question the even discussion dialogue around removing statues to Confederate war heroes. You know, as we reflect back on, and we can reflect back on how far we've come, but yet we find ourselves in this ongoing dialogue that seems to be decades, if not centuries, old at time. I think the description you gave of the South African approach gives us a lot to think about, a lot there. But just the challenge in dealing with those who take a contrarian view, and trying to reach them with compassion and love and understanding and forgiveness. But there may not be a question here, more observation.
Yeah. Well, the thing of it is that the notion of a critical race theory means different things to different people. for me, it means the lens by which we understand and examine the factors that have shaped our society has to be seen through race. Now you say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, tell me about it. I mentioned that I was born in a time of segregated schools, and segregated facilities, and that I couldn't get a job. And it was not because I wasn't qualified for something better. It was that I was a product of the intentional underdevelopment of a people. And so when we talk about economic reconciliation, what some people might call reparations, I'm not thinking about a debt that is owed because of slavery. I'm talking about a debt that is owed because of intentional underdevelopment. And the institutions that were created to perpetuate this intentional underdevelopment remain the same in many ways. And so race has to be the lens through which we understand the structures of power. And that's when you talk about critical race theory, I can't think of any other way to understand American history without understanding the central role of race. Now, I can speak about it more clearly because that central role has affected me personally, but one doesn't have to be blind to not see that race is central, has been central to our history. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people misunderstand and they get other things mixed up when you talk about history. And that's why it's important to understand the history. We've just gone through a period of observing the 100 observance of the tusk of the incident in Oklahoma.
About the Tulsa race riots.
People are amazed to hear about that. There are so many things like that that are part of the history. So when we talk about the centrality of race, how could those people not remember and retain the sense of the centrality of race?
And to not educate. I don't recall learning about that in my during Black History Month and others, right? And it's a disservice. We do have some questions from the audience. One is sort of you've had this incredible career spanning religion, activism, government, academia. Did you have fear when you made those moves? As some of those who are watching us, as they consider career change, do you have any advice to sort of make major career changes?
Well, none of those were a part of a strategic plan. I just did my job wherever I was as well as I could. And as a result of that, it got opportunities for me to be offered to move to something else. And for me, it was simply where could I make the best contribution rather than where will I make the most money or some other question that people ask. It was just where can I make the best contribution? I left business to go into government at a time in which government paid almost nothing. And I was making half the salary that I had been making before. But I thought at that time I could make the best contribution in government. So I joined the Carter administration.
You referenced President Carter. You've worked with President Carter. We talked about President Clinton. You worked with President Reagan, with President Bush. What did you learn from each? What any particular lessons or anything that particularly stand out? And then we have one last question before we close. So,
well, what did I learn from each? In those four presidents, two of them I was an executive. So in addition to being a senior advisor, I was also an operating officer, and the other two I was a senior advisor. For the first George Bush, I was a founding member of the Points of Light Foundation, which I served as vice chair. And I also was on this commission on historically Black colleges. Under Ronald Reagan, I was on a committee that was an advisory committee to the Agency for International Development. And I served as chair of a commission on Northern Marianas, which was a commission that had to make recommendations to Congress on what laws should apply when they became a Commonwealth. Under Jimmy Carter, I was Deputy Secretary of Interior, and so we ran a department of about 80,000 people, of which I was basically Chief Operating Officer. So I dealt with the policy angles of natural resources, as well as helping to manage human resources. Under Bill Clinton, in addition to being his ambassador to South Africa, I was also chairman of the commission that developed AmeriCorps. He appointed me chairman of the Commission on National and Community Service. And so I did something different for each, and I learned something different. People ask me which of the presidents I preferred, and I said each had something that attracted me. But I have to admit that Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton were the two people who I found myself with more affinity.
But you're nothing but a diplomat in response. Let me close with this. We just have a minute. We've talked about the past. We're living in this incredible moment. On the one hand, we see progress. Congress just made Juneteenth a national holiday. We've seen increased focus on diversity and increased dialogue. And when I went out and joined the BLM marches, I was struck by the diversity of age, ethnicity, gender identity who joined us in the streets. On the other hand, we see these efforts to restrict voting laws. Your grandchildren who grow up here in progressive Arlington, Virginia, have been the subject of racism and name calling. Some say we're living through this new era of Jim Crow. How do we have hope? Can we change as a nation? Can we truly make a change?
Well, the truth of the matter is that every step of my professional life, I have had reasons to be pessimistic. And as I look around now, I see so many reasons to be pessimistic. But I make a distinction between optimism and hope. Optimism has to do with looking at the evidence, surveying it, and saying that the evidence suggests that things are going to get better. Hope is the capacity to look at the evidence and then to look beyond it and to imagine something different and deeper, and then to set out to do it. And so I'm hopeful even when there are many reasons not to be optimistic.
Well, those are great words to close on. Dad, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much for your time. Let me say here in front of our virtual audience, I couldn't be more proud as a son. You set such a tremendous example, not only for me and my family, but for everyone. And your contributions are immeasurable. You've been tremendous. And thank you so much for joining us today.
You should know that the pride is mutual. So.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, on that note, well, thank you to the audience as we turn to emotion here. Thanks to the audience. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. And please stay engaged for the rest of the program. I think we're turning back to Jen.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Ambassador Joseph. Thank you, Jeff. I'm watching the audience comments and I see how moved we all are. And so thank you so much for coming and sharing these stories with us. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing your father with us. Happy Father's Day to both of you. I hope you have a great weekend ahead. So as we close out our afternoon and our event, I want to welcome Eric back. I want to welcome Chris Okenka. Hey guys, come up and join me, please.
Hi.
Hey there.
I mean, what can you say?
Amazing.
Right? What can you say? It's allergies. Allergies.
Mine are not allergies, for sure. So we want to close with a couple of things. Throughout the 2 days of our event, you all have been contributing to our collective art space, where we asked you to describe a time when a DEI initiative may not be necessary. So I thought what we could do is take a look at that here together.
Great.
How cool is that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's great.
So great to see all the comments and the contributions and images.
Yeah, it's very, very cool.
Yeah. Celebration, value, and respect. It says it right there. Without respect, without value for one another, we won't reach that destination that we're all journeying towards. So
Yeah.
this is excellent.
This is a great way to follow up that speech and that story.
If you haven't had a chance yet, don't go now, but run in later and add a note. But we will also share this. We'll save it and we'll share it out so that everybody can look back on it. I'll add it into our Slack community and everyone can take a look. Okay, so we are going to switch gears entirely for a moment. So earlier today, GLC hosted our lunchtime social where they whisked us off to a brainstorming session for the next signature cover, which of course is the Excel issue. And Scott Oldham, GLC's creative director, shared a comp with us so we can all see where it's headed. Talk about the crunch time of a deadline to get a cover comp together. Yeah. So we will pull that up here in a moment. It's a lot of concepting and work in a short amount of time. So here's some notes from Scott that I want to share with you. The winning concept from today's lunchtime social used the metaphor of a sliced pie to represent the various ingredients that go into making an award-winning project. Members of the winning team had suggested a headline built around the idea of piecing together an award-winning program. However, the awards issue doesn't really address the creative parts. It's a celebration of outstanding results, but the canvas of a pie is a strong, versatile visual. And so the signature team workshopped a few pie-related headlines before landing on a bold statement that any Excel winner should use freely. So thank you all for being here. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers. I want to say thank you to everyone who is here and for being part of this incredible event in these last 2 days. Chris, any last words or thoughts from you?
It's just every year I get blown away by this community, by the level of speakers and care and thought. I write so many notes and I never know what to tackle first. But just an extra thank you to you and the staff at SIIA and to Eric and Katie and everyone who worked on this program. It was amazing. It was a great way to get together and exactly what we needed in this moment of time to bring our community together.
I totally agree. And Eric, I think you're on the hook for hosting from now on.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such an incredible experience. And I want to thank you for having me and thank everyone for joining us. And many thanks really to all the folks who volunteered, like Chris said, to make this what it was. I'd be remiss if we didn't thank Tom and his team at Rive, who provided us with this platform and produced the heck out of us, didn't they? They did such a great job over these last 2 days. Thank you, Katie Mason from Team of Creatives, my annual meeting co-chair, who was always quick with a cocktail when we needed one. So thank you. Thank you to Renee Blessing, who helped keep us all in line. We were so lucky to have you along the way. And of course, a special thank you to Jen for your guidance, calm, and ever positive leadership. The AIM&P network will be better because of you. So thank you very much. And thank you all to allowing me to host this event. We have a great community. And the great thing about this community is we all have different gifts. So we all have different ways of saying to the world who we are. So I hope you will continue to cultivate and maintain the relationships that you've made over these last 2 days, both new and old. Link in with one another, follow each other, but let's stay connected. So as we say goodbye, let's take a look at all of your thoughts and ideas that you recorded in the Gather Voice video booth. Can't forget about that. So once again, thank you all so much, and I know we will see each other again very soon. So on behalf of everybody up here on the stage, until then, as Johnny Carson said, we bid you a fond farewell.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Christensen, and I feel that I really excel in my work when I am honest with myself and with my clients.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Bell, and I'm a proud member of the AM&P Education Committee. And I plan to reset and reinvent my work going forward by being even more engaged than ever in this great organization as it continues to flourish and bring on new members.
This year I plan to reset and reinvent my work by doing more professional development and taking classes that are a little outside of my typical day-to-day duties in editorial.
My work really excels when I collaborate with my AM&P network peers and coworkers, especially my furry coworkers.
Hi, my name is Barry Fitzgerald. I'm an account executive here with Cummings Printing Company. This year I plan to reset and reinvent myself as the Irish Brad Pitt. But seriously, after a difficult year, I'm going to reset by taking a trip home to Ireland to visit family and friends. And hopefully that will help to reset my year. Thanks very much. Bye.